Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Notes from Chicago. I'm Ashley Phillips, and today I am so excited. We have the Senior Director of Population Ecology from one of my favorite places in Chicago, the Lincoln Park Zoo. Her name is Lisa Faust. Thank you so much for joining us, Lisa.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm so excited to be here.
Before we get started with your work at the zoo and talk about the amazing really amenity and service it offers to the city, what do you love most about Chicago?
I've lived here longer than I've lived anyplace else. And I love the diversity. I love the diversity of the people. I love food. So I love just the range of restaurants from divey places to high-end places that are just so cool and exciting. And I think it's a beautiful, livable city. I love the lake and the fact that we have a lot of green city streets and green spaces that we can all enjoy. So I find it a really pleasant place to live as a big city with as many people as it has.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love it. I love it here too. That's why we have this podcast. Tell me more about what a director of population ecology does.
I am one of about 40-ish scientists who work at the zoo. And most people are, when I tell that to them, they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. It's, we always joke that it's this well-kept secret that there are scientists here that are working on care and welfare of animals that we have in Lincoln Park Zoo or in zoos across the country, but also people doing conservation work around the world. And my job is really kind of focused in more on helping wildlife populations in the wild. So I build computer models. I build models that help predict what's going to happen for a species in the future. And so I can take this tool, it's like I take this hammer and I can apply it to a lot of different conservation problems. So I've worked with rattlesnakes and elephants and Puerto Rican parrots, and I'm working right now on Tasmanian devils. So I can learn about all these different species and really get to learn from their conservation problems from the people who are working on the ground with them. And then I help them with this modeling work to kind of predict what's going to happen in the future for that species and what kind of conservation actions we can take that will hopefully mean that species stays around for the long term.
I love the zoo so much. I'm not.
Wonderful.
Ever since my kids were teeny tiny babies, we have been going to that zoo. I love that it's free. I love where it is. I love how it's designed. I love all the animals there. I love that my kids my kids are 10 and 12 now, and they turn into small children whenever we go back and grab my phone and they're like, we're taking photos of all these animals. And I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah.
But I love that part of it. But I think I probably personally think less about like that conservation piece. So like, how do you think about it? How do you want, visitors who are coming to the zoo to think about it? And think about the work and really like maybe the broader work that the zoo does beyond exhibiting the animals or
in some ways it's not surprising that we're kind of this hidden part of the zoo that people don't know about, because I think that many people are just there focused on having a great day with their family, on maybe learning a little bit, on maybe getting outside and wandering around on a beautiful day and getting a snack. And, the bottom line is that your visit to the zoo, and if you buy popcorn or whatever, that supports this work. The zoo has always been really committed. We've had a conservation and science department since 1989. So we have been committed to investing in this side of our mission, whether or not people know about it, for a really long time. And we're really proud of that effort and that impact. I think that, we try with signage, we try to incorporate some of this work into our chats, and the interpretation that we give, and we have tried different lecture series in the past and everything. But I think that probably one of the biggest things that people can see now is related to this part of the mission is that they might see people collecting data in front of exhibits, and they might see people with an iPad, like studying where the animals are. And that is our welfare related data collection, where we're monitoring a lot of our species, multiple times a day to try and figure out how are they using their exhibit? How can we change their exhibit to make it more enriching? And I think sometimes seeing that science kind of on display makes people think about that bigger thing that's happening behind the scenes. So another place people can see that is if they go to the Regenstein Center for African Apes or our macaque exhibit. We do cognitive touchscreen research with those species, and you can actually see scientists doing that, and it's interpreted by an education person. So there are opportunities to see it right there. There's opportunities from the signage, and I think that whether or not people are fully aware of all of that conservation mission that happens out there, it's an important part of our identity, as an organization, and we're really proud of it. And I'm excited that the zoo has supported it so deeply for so many decades. So
I think it's so amazing. I think it's so amazing the work that you're doing and that the zoo is doing, both maybe more behind the scenes for most visitors, but then also just I love the zoo. I love the zoo. I'm a fangirl for the zoo.
no, that's
I think
fantastic.
it's so cool. It like emblematic of the perfect day in Chicago when you can combine it with the farmers market right there, once it starts up again, and then the zoo right next door, and it's and then maybe even go to the beach. Like it's beautiful. Do you have a particular animal that you've studied that you find particularly interesting or fascinating?
Of course. I mean, the really neat thing about the type of work I get to do is I really get to go from species to species and really, really dive in, which is just fascinating because the ecology of all of these different species is just incredible. But, near and dear to my heart is probably the species that I worked on for my dissertation, and we still kind of have collaborative work on, is elephants, African elephants, where I was working at the zoo and encouraged by my mentor and advisor at the time to start collaborating with some field scientists that we had been providing some grants to. And they worked on an elephant population in northern Tanzania, northeastern Tanzania, in Tarangire National Park. And so I got to go to Tanzania while I was working at the zoo and kind of, help them kind of even organize all of their history of 20 years of monitoring of this population, so that we could analyze that demographic data and look at how is the population growing and what do the birth and the death rates look like. And so the data is cool, but really, being in the field and like watching a big group of elephants they're matriarchal. So you've got the moms and their kids and their siblings and their aunties and their grandmothers all kind of in a big social group, and just watching all those dynamics and seeing how they communicate with each other and how they come together and then kind of split apart throughout their day was just really fascinating to see. So
That's amazing. Let's go back a little bit to the modeling that you do. You've
yeah.
actually created um, software tools to help you do this, and then have opened that up to like other zoos. Basically, it sounds like any organization can use this. Talk a little bit more about that, about those tools, and then also that decision.
The software decision was something I kind of fell into, and it's ended up being a really interesting part of my job. I'm not the developer or programmer, but I'm working with people who have those technical skills because I understand the needs from the community. And so one of the big packages that we're still working on developing right now, or putting out the new version of, is called PopLink. And originally, we used that for zoo populations to track all the individual animals, in the population, track where they move to, what their birth date is, what their death date is, who their parents are, and that key information is so important to provide the foundation of all of the modeling that we do and all of the decisions we need to make to keep healthy populations in zoos. But we recognize as well that there are a lot of wildlife populations that are tracked at that individual level. And especially wildlife reintroduction programs where we're trying to do some breeding in human care so that we can release animals onto the landscape and really work to recover a population by kind of boosting what's happening in the wild with additional animals. And so we're working with a program in Puerto Rico on the Puerto Rican parrot and their population recovery. And they have 2 aviaries where they've been doing all of this breeding and releasing to kind of bring back the parrot from 13 individuals that they were down to in the wild. Now they're up to hundreds and hundreds in the wild through this release and reintroduction. And so we worked with them to set up that stud book, the database, kind of using this software so that they could track that population over the generations as they were working on it. And now we're working with them to enhance it so they can kind of track even more of the important data for those kind of recovery programs. And so while I never thought when I left grad school, I never thought like, oh, I'm going to, somehow use software or to become a software developer. It's been a kind of fun and interesting aspect of my career. And it's definitely when you see people who are, they're spending so much time on the ground in the field, they're so focused in on what's happening with the species, but then they're like, oh, and then I get to have to put stuff into Excel and it doesn't, work as I want to, and it doesn't track all the information I need. It's kind of nice to be able, like, we have a tool that can help you. So it's been a fun project.
How many organizations have used it so far?
That is something that I do not have good information on because we don't really track the downloads. So as you said, we make it freely available to anyone.
Yeah.
For a period of its history, it was used across probably 300 different, maybe 200 to 300 different species that we manage for zoo populations. They've since transitioned to a newer piece of software, but probably hundreds of organizations have used it over its history.
When you think about sort of the broader landscape of wildlife conservation, where do you think your work will become more critical, maybe over the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we know that wild species are just facing more and more stressors, more and more threats. So, climate change and how that's impacting where species might find their optimum habitat fragmentation, and more pressure from people, pollution, all of these things become all of these pressures on a species. And what my computer models try and do is they try and help us look ahead, not just to what's happening right now, but what's happening over the next couple of decades. And ideally, identify the populations before they're really at risk. Like, ideally, we don't get into a situation where we need to do a reintroduction program for a species because we protected it before it's gotten to that very, very tiny population size of 13 individuals. In reality, sometimes we wait that long, but the computer models kind of can help us identify species that need a little bit of conservation action right now to kind of prevent that future and or that future moving ahead. So I think that I hope that my work helps people make smart decisions about how the conservation actions that they could take with the species they're working with. That's another big aspect of building a computer model is you can kind of compare, well, what if I put my money into buying land and restoring habitat versus making a corridor versus releasing animals from a captive population? We can compare those 3 options in the model and kind of be like, this is the most effective and like cost effective and conservation effective strategy across a whole range of things. And so helping people make kind of smarter decisions with the limited resources that we have for conservation is also a really important aspect of it.
Do you have, what is your data telling you now in terms of where you should kind of turn that attention? Are there specific species that you're thinking about over that next year or over that?
I mean, yeah, it's challenging. So we mostly, kind of work in partnership with the field scientists who have that data. So we kind of get approached by potential clients, right? Potential collaborators who say, hey, I've got a big question. Do you have time to help? And my center of scientists right now, we're thinking about beach mice and leopards in Indonesia and Tasmanian devils and, kind of all running the gamut everywhere. But I think we know that there are a lot of charismatic species that are declining, but we also know that there's a lot of understudied species that, huge declines in bird populations, huge declines in reptile and amphibian populations that we really don't know that much information about. We just kind of have a sense of those big declines. So We kind of go wherever there's data and wherever people have those questions and wherever they approach us, and kind of work with those populations as they identify as their priorities.
If you could have our listeners take away one thing from today, what would that be?
I think just knowing that Chicago cultural organizations like Lincoln Park Zoo and the Field Museum and the Shedd Aquarium, like, we are all doing all of this conservation and research work that they might not ever have a sense of when they come for a visit and enjoy that day with their families. But their visit, their membership, their ticket sales, all of those things, those all go to fund these parts of our mission that we feel are really, really core, and that we feel are doing the really important work that needs to happen in the wild for a lot of different species and ecosystems. And I think that people don't necessarily realize that when they're like standing in line for the popcorn. They're like, oh, that's a little bit expensive. But part of the reason is because we're supporting all of these really important things. So I think that if you can add that extra layer to your fun day out with your family, I think that that's a kind of a nice aspect to think about with your Chicago, cultural treasures.
Do you have a favorite exhibit at the zoo?
I do love the Pepper Family Wildlife Center, where our newly renovated lion exhibits was one of the last kind of new renovations that we made. And I love lions. We work on a conservation project with collaborators with lions, and it is just like so incredible to see those big animals. The building has all sorts of cool features where we have like a zip line that we can attach meat and carcasses and big bones to, that you see them jump up and grab at, and they are so powerful. And you have this like comparison with the cat that lives in your house and this big lion sitting lazing in the sun on top of a big rock. And I really love that exhibit. I think it's really wonderfully designed, and the habitat, like the animals, just use all parts of it. So that's probably my favorite.
That's very cool. Yeah, the new renovation. It's been a couple years.
Couple years.
Couple years. It is so cool. That building is so cool, and such a sea change from what it was before, which I imagine had been around for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, that's, a historic landmark building. So it had, those very, very old style, smaller exhibits, especially for cats, especially for big species. It was always on our list for one of the targets of the renovations that the zoo definitely wanted to make. But being a landmark building, that made it more challenging to renovate. Obviously, you've got to kind of keep a lot of the spirit and the structure of the building without modifying it. And so I was really impressed with how we worked with the architects to come up with some really cutting edge exhibit elements that honored that building, but really made it a fantastic and modern space for the lions. So yeah, we're really proud of it.
Yeah, it's very, very cool. What are some ways that people can support the zoo coming up? The zoo typically has like very cool events in the summer and in the spring.
Yeah.
Once the weather starts to get nicer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, we have great events all year round, but definitely summer they ramp up, and we have things like our adults night out events, like lots of evening events where you don't want to run around the zoo with tons of small children running in front of you, which I personally, I love. I love to see the delight and the joy. But if you want to hang out and see the zoo after hours, see the animals after hours, have a few adult beverages, have some good food, hear some music, like there's a lot of those kind of events. There's wine walks and garden evenings, and just some really neat events kind of showcasing the zoo at its finest. I think that Run for the Zoo is sold out already, but that is every year in May or the first weekend of June. And it's always, that's a big fundraiser for us as well. And run or walk. I've done the walk, not the running. But, all of those events are kind of special ways that you can help support the work. But as I said, a membership or a visit is also a great thing to do.
You've also been at the zoo for almost 30 years. So Do you have a favorite memory as you reflect back on your time there?
It has gone so quickly. But I love walking around the zoo early in the morning, and the gibbons, our white-cheeked gibbons, will call to each other. The male and the female do these echoing calls that would normally echo across the forest, but here in Lincoln Park, they're echoing back and forth from the buildings. And hearing those calls is so cool. Walking past the wolf exhibits, the red wolves, and if a siren goes past, those wolves will howl like it's another wolf, and just some special moments, often early in the morning or when it's really quiet, where you just get to kind of hear those animals being wild animals, but kind of embedded in the middle of the city. Those kind of special moments.
We've talked quite a bit about the work that you do, um, but we're not all scientists. So, what are small actions that Chicagoans can take to help support conservation?
Yeah, I think you know, it's always important to think about, you know, your own life, your own space, and these ways that you can help in terms of helping species or helping the planet. And so it's spring. My thoughts are already going to what can I plant in my garden boxes? What can I put into the ground? And I think that people can do so much by planting some native plants. It doesn't need to be 100%, but planting native plants as a big core of your garden or your window boxes is such a great thing. And also leaving those plants up. Like, you don't need to clean out your garden at the end of the year, but you can leave the vegetation up, and it becomes such important habitat in the winter and food sources for animals who are staying with us year round. So I think that I always think about those planting actions. There's also on the zoo's website, we have this program called Take Action with Us, and it's pretty easy to just Google Lincoln Park Zoo Take Action with Us, and that's where we list a bunch of different actions that people can take, looking at their purchasing, like thinking about FSC certified paper products, which really protect wild forests and keep them intact, or other things, small actions that they can take. And that's a nice place to go to kind of get more information. And it will alert you when there is legislation that you can comment on and advocate for that will help wildlife. So we like to kind of be that resource for people to figure out those little steps that they can take.
That's very, very cool. All right. We're almost at the end of our time. But one question I love to ask is when people come visit, what are the things that you tell them they have to do in Chicago? They have to do, they have to see, they have to eat. What are your top five?
I tend to focus on food a little bit, but I'll try and mention other things as well. For visitors, it's, obviously I have to say that they need to come to the zoo and walk through on a beautiful morning. But I talk about the Chicago Botanic Gardens in the spring and in the fall. I think it's just like such a beautiful space, and, just kind of incredible garden displays and a wonderful place to be outside. Um, and then I kind of focus in on what neighborhood they're going to be in. So I live in Andersonville, and so the places that I always love to recommend to people there are mostly food related. And it's the Hop Leaf, which is incredible beer bar, has been around for decades and decades, has anchored the neighborhood for so long, and has like really stunning food actually for just being a great beer bar. They have a really great menu. And we love going to Anteprima, which is a great Italian restaurant. And then there's this Middle Eastern bakery that has spices and lentils and all of these different imported goods that are just so intriguing to kind of wander around their shelves. And then they have probably the best lentil soup I've ever had there as well. So I tend to focus on food things for people when they're coming into town. That's where my first thoughts always go. But Chicago is just such a great place of all these neighborhoods. And I like to kind of figure out where people are going to be and how to explore that neighborhood as well.
Love it. It is such a food town, and I love
Yeah.
eating my way through it. So I totally relate.
Yes.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining today. This was so interesting. Thank you for all the work that you do. And thanks to Lincoln Park Zoo as well.
Thank you. We love being kind of the city's free zoo that you can just wander in and spend a day and enjoy.
Thank you for listening to Notes from Chicago. This podcast is edited and produced by Tanisha Blakely. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to Notes from Chicago on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.